Hey, so right now I'll be watching The Weakest Tamer Began a Journey to Pick Up Trash, Episode 3. And I don't really have much to say before I get into the episode, so now into the episode. Oh, that's her dad. Is that when she's born? Oh, I think it is. Also, her mom looks totally fine for just having given birth. Some parents you turned out to be. If anything, I think this series is going to promote found family versus biological family. This really is conditional love. They seemingly loved her up until they found out she was starless. You know, as sad as it is that her entire family basically cast her aside, it's for the better. Why would you want to be part of this family anyways? It's so superficial in this sense. The lies. Well, I think you're the oldest, so maybe. Well, this family is a stark contrast to Nefatima's family in Fluffy Paradise. But how do they know that maybe she's just like a very late bloomer? Oh, she's still a tamer. She really does remind me of Nema. No, not from what we've seen. Her dad looks kinda grayish. The fortune teller? It is! Has she known this long? Could she be able to tell that she would become a starless one day? Ah, from her past life. Well, maybe she knows she's reincarnated. So she does know. But you knew enough. What? This guy is an elder. But I mean, she's still able to hunt even without stars, so just the fact they have the hunting ability doesn't mean that nobody else can hunt. Maybe the gods have bigger plans for her, most likely. I mean, maybe it would have been too much for him to just lie and say at the very least 1 star. Oh, they're seen as the ones being abandoned by the gods. So it is a video game that she used to play. He probably thinks Femishi isn't even his. You just said you don't choose how many stars you get, so... just happens. I really hope she goes back to the village and shows up her parents. She has your exact same hair color, how could she not be yours? Yep, there goes all the love they seemingly had. Yep, they pretty much think you're a bad omen. Although wouldn't killing a bad omen also be a bad omen? I don't know. It tastes bad or she can't taste anything. Wouldn't the wood be wet? Also, she can do it a little bit. Wow. Is the fortune teller gonna find her? Yeah. Hmm. You know, for a 1-star, she has pretty good foresight. You know, at least she's still nice to her. You know, another comparison could be made to Naruto. He didn't choose to have an angel fox shooter beside him either, and yet they treated him like he did. She didn't choose to be a starless, it just happened. Well, I'm glad she met this fortune teller and she was nice enough to give her things. Hmm. You can say that as well. Yeah, it'd be good if they knew beforehand you're starless. Yeah, so that you can know if they're truly trustworthy or not, and you know they have your back. Yeah. I'm glad she learned so many skills from the fortune teller. Oh. Oh, did she live with her for the past 3 years? Religious beliefs. You know, either her dress just became tattered while she was on her new journey, or she never got a new dress in 3 years. Which is surprising because I figured that maybe the fortune teller would make her a new dress or something. Or at the very least help her figure it out. Oh wow. Is she dead? Oh, that's right. I think she is dead. Hmm. Did they find out she was helping her and then they killed her? Oh, she died of a cold. Her dad. So did she really die of a cold? Such an elitist perspective. Now she knows even her own parents want her dead. Or at the very least her father. At the very least her father and her siblings. Or maybe all her family. Oh, he's gonna blame her death on Femicia. So they knew she was being taken care of this whole time, or what? The entire village turned against her. Oh, shit. I forgot she still thought that. She's like, you didn't eat me. Oh. Oh. He's like a Pokemon. Well, he can make sound. But at least you're wanted by Sora. So in this episode, we finally see the backstory of what happened to Femicia. And although I already knew more of this was gonna happen, to me it didn't seem like the mother outright hated her. She was just really surprised in the fact that her husband insinuated that maybe she had an affair and Femicia isn't his. But she never really seemed to be outright mean to her, but then again, we didn't get to see her reaction because her siblings stopped her before she can get close to her own mother. And like I said, the fact that they could raise you for so many years, and yet, just because you're starless, they no longer loved you. For the past 4 years, everything is fine. But once they find out you're starless after those 4 years, it's like, no, they don't care anymore. I couldn't imagine taking care of Tonya for about 5 years and then casting her aside like she's nothing. That just proves to me that the family really is superficial in a sense. I can understand that there's supposedly religious fear, that those without stars are the ones that are abandoned by the gods. And now that it's come to light that she's a starless, now that she's 5 years old, that now a calamity could strike. But the fact that it's been about 3 years since this point, clearly there is no calamity, or at the very least not right now. And the fact that they want to save their village by bringing her back to the village and killing her doesn't make much sense to me. Do they think just because Amicia is from their village, regardless of the fact that she's there or not, they're still gonna fall into a calamity? Because that's the only reasoning I could see as to like why they would want to kill her. And even then, that's not even a good enough reasoning. And of course, they took advantage of the fact that the fortune teller died of a cold, or apparently of a cold, though I'm more inclined to believe maybe the leader of the village killed her, and then just to put the blame on Amicia. And now they're all after her. The fact that they're all after her, though, that's crazy. I figured at least maybe like 1 or 2 wouldn't be after her, but that's not the case, apparently. The adults more so than the kids, because the kids, just because of what they see and hear, they're gonna just hate her just because everybody else seems to hate her. But the adults, especially like the elderly, the fact that they either fear enough or they're angry enough that they're stardust in the village that they're willing to kill her, that's crazy. Sarafi also had to deal with a similar situation from the manga and anime series Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts. Since in their world, although they don't have stars or starless people, they do have humans and beast kind. So there's that distinction between the kinds, and also those chosen to be sacrifices, which is what Sarafi specifically is. She's the 99th human sacrifice to the Beast King. But certain events happen where she doesn't end up getting sacrificed at all, and she ends up living in the Beast Kingdom. But since she's a human, and the Beast Kingdom's heir is miasma, Sarafi's human body couldn't handle it, and she ended up getting really sick as a result. So what the Beast King did was that he took her to the human kingdom, and left her in a small town where a human doctor could heal her. As since he ended up leaving her there when nobody else was around, nobody in that town knew where Sarafi came from. And since His Majesty had left a lot of money for Sarafi's treatment, she was treated as a normal patient. And when she offered to help her out in the hospital, they were more than happy to let her do so. But it wasn't until I believe a few days later where the villagers started questioning where Sarafi came from, and when they found out she was being treated for miasma poisoning, they managed to find out that she came from the town where the most recent sacrifice came from. So going off of that, they realized that she must be the 99th sacrifice. And the fact that she wasn't dead and was living in their village currently, they figured that she must have run away from the Beast King. So this of course caused mass panic. So all the villagers started to avoid her, and they became so violent in their fear that they ended up throwing a brick through the hospital's window, and it hit the doctor. And since the violence and fear of everybody else was getting to be too much, the doctor told Sarafi that she had to leave, because everybody feared that once the Beast King realized where she was, he would come get her and destroy the village for helping her hide out there. Which of course isn't the case. So Sarafi is forced to leave the village, and all the people who she thought were kind to her now despised her. She felt truly alone. Since she figured that His Majesty abandoned her, these people have now abandoned her, now she has nothing. And I guess you could also say in a sense that just how crucial Sora is to Ivy's emotional and mental health, His Majesty is to Sarafi. Since right when she's about to fall off a cliff, His Majesty appears and saves her. And she's overjoyed at seeing that he didn't abandon her. He came back for her. Just like how Ivy realized that Sora wasn't trying to eat her, he was trying to save her. So they're both despised for something that they can't control, Ivy's being a starless and Sarafi being chosen as a sacrifice, and they both met these unlikely creatures who helped them change and grow as people. And in both of these cases, both religious and societal fear is what controls all these people to target the one that's different, to target the one that they think is going to bring horrible calamities to them. And I'm not excusing how they each went about doing so, because there are much better ways to go about this. One being not blaming a 5-year-old child for being a starless, and just letting her live out of the village without trying to persecute her, or throwing rocks at her and trying to kill her. And in Sarafi's case, the villagers didn't have to be so extreme and attack a hospital of all places. And once they found out that Sarafi was in fact a sacrifice that wasn't sacrificed, they could have at the very least calmly explained to her their fears and what was going on, and then asked her to leave. Neither group of people had the right to be so extreme in their fear and anger. I understand that fear is a very powerful thing, but it doesn't excuse any of their actions. Another female character that also deals with a very similar situation is Anastasia from the manga and anime series Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, whom we meet in Volume 12, Chapter 71. And her story is, a very long time ago, one of her ancestors ended up having a child with a beast man. And although at this point, her connection to the ancestors is so far that in reality, she doesn't have any beast kind blood in her body anymore. But the villagers of course don't care about that. Simply because the villagers back then knew that her ancestor had slept with a beast man and had his child, they deemed all of the descendants to be witches. And her parents ended up doing a different thing than Ivy's parents. When Anastasia's parents couldn't take the persecution from the villagers anymore, they left a very young Anastasia behind. She had to deal with the discrimination and the hatred from the villagers on her own. She didn't have anybody to take care of her, to help her do things, or to even just be her friend. And it wasn't until a boy named Ocelot came around that she finally met somebody who was kind to her and didn't care that she was called a witch. And although she lived on the outskirts of town, where she wasn't bothering anybody, when they found out that she had a garden and that she was growing this plant they didn't know anything about, they immediately deemed it as evil because of course they thought she was a witch, and they destroyed all her hard work. And like I said earlier in my reaction, the villagers in Ivy's village are very idiotic in thinking that if they keep going after her, that she will not at some point retaliate. And Anastasia does just that. When the villagers come, and not only do they threaten her garden, but Sarfi as well, she decides to play into the witch role and threatens them to leave. I've also just noticed this pattern now, where oftentimes those who are discriminated against tend to live very far removed from the people that persecute them, and yet although years could pass where nothing happens, the fear inside of these people is so strong that they will literally go and try to instigate something to happen just to do some mental gymnastics to somehow make it seem like it's the one who's persecuted's fault and not them for going over there and bothering them in the first place. None of these characters chose to be seen as something to be feared, but yet they're always the one that pay for it. And it's almost always the ones who claim to be afraid of them that end up causing all this trouble in the first place. Now here are a few examples as to why using their fear against them isn't always the best case. Although seemingly for a while, everything was fine after Anastasia scared off the villagers, this of course would come with repercussions. Those being that, the following night, as both she and Sarfi are just sitting down talking, all of her windows are suddenly shattered, and the villagers are the ones behind it. Since they took Anastasia's threat seriously, they decided that they wouldn't let her torment the village anymore, and they would finally deal with her. In the animated series Gargoyles, you have these two different species living together. You have the gargoyle species, who have lived in this place for centuries. And then you have these humans who reside in a castle that sits on top of the cliffs where the gargoyles used to live. And they now live in a more of a tolerance type of situation, at the very least from the humans' perspective, because the gargoyles, except for one, care for the humans, while the humans, although grateful for all the help and the protection that the gargoyles bring, they still hold a prejudice to them. The reigning princess, the mage, and the majority of the people living there don't see them in a favorable light, although they literally depend on them to save them from invasions. And it just so happened in one case where these three young gargoyles were just hanging around, not bothering anybody, and when this young human boy named Tom ended up going towards them and was just asking them a few questions, his mother then appeared angered at the fact that they were near her son, and she threw a stick at them. Although they tried to explain to her that they weren't hurting him, they were just talking to him. She refused to believe that and called them monsters. And upon hearing that, one of the three gargoyles then told the other two that if they're gonna call them monsters, then they might as well live up to the name, and they made themselves appear very menacing towards them. But this backfired because one, this only solidified those people's fears in gargoyles. And two, the leader of their clan, Goliath, took immediate action. He was disappointed that they decided to stoop so low, and he ended up sending them down to the rookery, where all the gargoyle eggs were, so they can think about what they've done, and later on he would come back to them and discuss their punishment. So these two are examples as to why sometimes, when you try to fight back by using the exact same thing that these people fear about you, it could end up in disaster. Now that I've given these examples, I'll now give one where we see exactly what it is the villagers fear might happen. In the manga and anime series, Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, Episode 7, Frieren and her group enter a city, where although demons are feared by basically everybody, in this town specifically, they cannot attack them. Since apparently, the demons and the people of the city have been at war for over 28 years, and just recently, they decided to implement a peace treaty that while it's in effect, neither side can attack the other, regardless if they're actually citizens of that city or not. And although basically all the citizens hate the demons, when they see them walking around town, they don't go out of their ways to attack them. The demons know they're hated, but they know that the humans won't do anything. But Frieren knows better than to trust the demons. Since although her current party members want to believe that demons can be reasoned with because they can speak the language of humans, Frieren knows otherwise. Since many years ago, in her first ever party, she comes across this unnamed young demon child who has just eaten a villager's daughter. And although her party member Himmel is hesitant to kill this demon child, Frieren isn't. But before she can do so, the chief of the village stops her and says that if she does this, then they're no better than the demons. His reasoning being that the demons don't have to eat humans to survive. So believing this, he says that she should be given the opportunity to atone for what she did, since he says it's only a child. Although every other villager is against this, especially the dead child's parents. Everybody returns back to the village, and although Frieren tries to tell Himmel he's gonna regret not killing it, Himmel says that they can speak the same language. Why not see where this goes? We then see that over the course of a few days, the chief and his daughter spending a lot of quality time with the unnamed young demon child. And while seeing this proves to Himmel that the demon child wasn't all bad, we then see the chief's house burning up in flames, with the chief dead while the unnamed young demon child stands outside holding the chief's daughter in his arms, and then the demon turns her head and looks at the parents whose daughter she ate, while the mother exclaims that they should have killed her back then. The young demon child then walks towards the grieving parents, saying how every day she feels the desire to kill her, while saying that she just wants to live in peace. So that's why she's bringing the chief's daughter to them, to serve as a replacement for the daughter that she ate, while everyone looks on in horror. Himmel then says that's the village chief's daughter, to which she says he's gone now. She then goes on to say that she seems to have somehow made a mistake. So now she has no choice but to take the child hostage. Himmel then quickly slices one of her arms off and retrieves the child. Frieren then asks if he won't stop her from killing her this time, to which he says no. The young unnamed demon child then says mom. And while she's disintegrating, Frieren then says, like monsters, demons don't raise their young. They spend most of their time, after birth, living in solitude, meaning that they're solitary creatures by nature. They have no concept of family. So why does she use the word mom? To which the demon replies, because it stops you from killing us. Back in present times, Frieren tells her current group that demons only use human words to deceive them. And such monsters who are capable of speech were defined as demons, who are descended from monsters who cried help from the shadows to lure humans to them, seemingly finally getting them to understand that the demons cannot be trusted. So that's what I meant by what I think that the villagers think could happen if they were ever to, at the very least, either embrace or tolerate Ivy. That regardless of how much time she spent with them or anything, a calamity could still happen. So their best bet at safety is for her to no longer be in the village. But they of course want to take it a step further, and they want to kill her. Which at this point, I'm like, no. Ivy has done nothing. I would understand if maybe due to her being a starless, she ended up deliberately causing the death of another person, like this demon child did. At the very least, they could justify it. But Ivy has done nothing. She's devastated that she doesn't have stars. But it doesn't mean that she's gonna turn outright evil just because of that, and she's gonna try and hurt the villagers. And who knows, maybe the villagers have some sort of bias towards starless. Because as of right now, the villagers who kicked Ivy out haven't explicitly said anything about there having been a starless before and calamity happening to them personally or to any other villages that they know of. But it's just a fear in and of itself of the fact that these are not normal people because they don't have any stars. They're afraid of the unknown, the what ifs, and what might be. So like I've said before, I do understand their fear, but there's ways to go about it. An example of this being from the manga and anime series Peach Boy Riverside, where the people of this country are constantly being terrorized by ogres to such an extent that they have an entire island full of them. And even though the hero, Momotaro, is constantly slaying ogres and even manages to get to the island and kill all the ogres there, it doesn't really change much because there's still a mass amount of ogres still killing people afterwards. And on one night, he is visited by a very distraught man who ends up revealing to him that he's an ogre. And although he thought he could change since he ended up marrying a human woman and they even had a child together, his instincts took over and he ended up devouring his own wife. And he was terrified because he knew he couldn't keep his instincts under control and eventually he would eat his own son. So he begged Momotaro to kill him and informed him that he left his son with people he trusted. The following day, as Momotaro is walking around, he hears the townspeople calling somebody a monster. He then sees a young boy tied up while being beaten by the townspeople. And when he asks what's going on, one of the women tell him that although they took him in, they found out he wasn't really human. He was an ogre. And that everybody here has had their families ripped apart by ogres. So of course this one couldn't be trusted, regardless of the fact that he's a child. But Momotaro refused to believe that, and he decided to take him in and train him to kill ogres instead of killing people. And from what we see years later, the young man now named Mikoto continues to do the work that his master taught him to do. Now I'm actually using this for two examples. The first one being, of course, that there was an understanding as to why the townspeople refused to believe that although Mikoto was a child at the time, he was still an ogre, and therefore he couldn't be trusted, so of course the mistrust was understood. But it didn't justify their actions. But this also proved another thing, is the fact that, unlike the fate that the chief of the city, Frieren, met, Momotaro was correct in trusting in Mikoto. And because he trusted him, now that he's gone, Mikoto is continuing to do his work for him, proving he's above his half-ogre instincts. In the world of the manga and anime series Beastars, you have the predator animals and the prey animals. And the prey animals are in constant fear that the predator animals could spontaneously lose control and give in to their natural instincts and kill them. To the point where it's not uncommon to hear about so many deaths happening that involve a predator losing control of themselves and either attacking or killing a prey animal. And also many predators themselves fear the possibility of losing control one day, and they always try to keep themselves in check. So I can understand their very real instincts that these particular creatures have that many others fear could come out, and in a lot of cases they do come out, but also the way that these events are handled afterwards isn't always the best, because either the wrong people are persecuted, maybe just by association they're persecuted, or even just from the likely possibility that it could happen, they're judged and persecuted for that. So I can understand both sides, why the prey are so afraid of the predators, and why the predators are so afraid of hurting the prey. But one thing that the main character school does is that although it could be a school with full segregation, which is one side of the school only for predators and one side of the school only for preys, they don't do that because they know that once they graduate and get out into the real world, they're going to be constantly surrounded by each other. They can't avoid each other forever. So in having them intermix with each other every day, there is probably hope that this will teach both sides to not be so fearful of each other and to maybe control each other from panicking and there possibly being less accidents or loss of control from happening. And there's actually even some cases where a predator and prey animal end up being in a relationship, whether it be platonic or romantic. So the fear isn't always there, but for a lot of these animals, it's a very difficult thing to ignore. But again, I say all this to say, now although I understand where the villagers in Ivy's village are coming from, especially due to the fact that most likely they've been fed this doctrine their entire lives, and the only one who seems to think reasonably is the fortune teller, who's a woman who actually doesn't live in the village full time. It's no wonder that they just let themselves just believing in whatever the people at the church tell them, since in reality, they've really never met anybody else who thinks the opposite of what they do. Now here's my last comparison for this part, since I still have quite a few comparisons for other parts left. From the video game and animated series, Castlevania. In this series, you have a woman named Lisa, who's in search of knowledge to be able to help and heal people, and so she does the unthinkable. She decides to pay the vampire Dracula a visit, in hopes that he could teach her how to make real medicine, and not fake medicine like everybody else. And through their gained mutual respect for each other, we then fast forward to many years later, and we find out that they're married and they've had a son. And while Lisa's home, she is suddenly visited by people from the church, who deem her a witch, who have married whom they refer to as Satan, and all the books and knowledge that she has about herbs that can help people as being blasphemous and demonic. And because of all these things, she will be burned at the stake. And unfortunately, Dracula isn't home at the time, and by the time he ends up back home, he's too late. So this example in particular, I feel that people could see it in various ways, but the two that come to mind for me is, one, that 100% the people from the church are wrong. She was literally just trying to help people. She has managed to live married to Dracula for such a long time, where all of a sudden, is that now an issue, and the people of the church literally had to go all the way to her house because they didn't live in town, and then just deemed her a witch and destroyed her belongings, and burned her house, so that nobody else could access these books, regardless of the fact that Lisa has proven that these remedies actually help people. They're not demonic at all. The second take that I believe people could have is, Lisa brought this on herself, since she knowingly went to a vampire, Dracula of all vampires to be specific. And not only did she gain knowledge from him, she then married him and had a half-human, half-vampire child. So doing all this, how could she expect to not be persecuted by the church at some point in time? She could have avoided this altogether. She could have just gotten the knowledge from Dracula, taught him some manners like she wanted, and then left. And then maybe from just doing that, the church couldn't have used that against her to burn her at the stake. But since she did marry Dracula and had a half-breed child with him, that was enough. Although also you could say that simply them knowing that she got all this knowledge from Dracula himself, and even if they themselves bore witness to the fact that these herbal remedies were helping people, since it wasn't directly from the church, regardless of the fact that it was actually helping people, whereas their old-fashioned church remedies weren't, they still could have used the fact that she got these herbal remedies from whom they deemed as Satan, and that could have been their one and only reason to have her burned at the stake. And like I mentioned before, this family is a stark contrast to Nema's family from the anime series Living Paradise, since in that series it's a very similar dynamic. It's a mom and a dad, an older brother and sister, and both Nema and Felicia are the youngest. But what's different in their family is the fact that even if Nema didn't have any skills or abilities, her family would love her regardless. But with Felicia, that isn't the case. You literally either have to have 1 star at the very least for them to even seem to care about you. Because I feel like even if she only had 1 star, he would maybe be upset about that. But then again, I think his oldest daughter also has 1 star. So maybe he would be like, oh, maybe it's just how the family is. But I mean, it's also given that there would eventually be somebody without stars. And the fact that back in the old times, everybody used to be starless. And now only recently are stars very prominent in their society. And they're now deemed to be this huge deal by the gods. It's the only reason why it's a big deal now. But we've seen that just because she's a starless doesn't mean that she isn't able to hold her own out by herself. Though I guess truly the only one person who didn't outright hate Felicia, who was the fortune teller. And at the very least, she had 3 good years with her, learning everything she could from the fortune teller and reading the books and learning how to make new traps and everything, that she was much more prepared now to go off on a journey instead of immediately after she was 5 years old. And also the fact that apparently the villagers knew Felicia was with the fortune teller, so I don't know why they would let her slide for so many years if they knew, but then again, maybe they just found out, or who knows, but the fact that her dad's gonna lead the charge to hunt her down is insane. And I also wonder, now that 3 years have passed, what her siblings are like too, because they're older now just like Felicia is. So I'm wondering that if she sees them again, how she's gonna react. If she's gonna be paralyzed with fear, or if she's gonna try and hold her own against her own family. That'd be kinda interesting though, that when she encounters hunters one day, it turns out it's either her dad or maybe even her brother. And see how she deals with the dynamic and how they think of her now that she's much older. They're not gonna think much of her because she's still a starless. Although like I said, being a starless hasn't inhibited her in any way to learn a lot of skills. So really, I don't see what's really the point of stars, of just maybe you're gonna be more adept than others at this skill, but pretty much anybody can learn those skills. So I don't really see what the point of stars is. And I also want to know who started the whole thing where if you're starless, the gods have abandoned you. Does that mean the gods abandoned everybody before when they were all starless? Because I'm pretty sure it's just a brand new religious doctrine in order to get rid of those who might seemingly be weak, but maybe they're not. Also, apparently from the opening song, Felicia will eventually meet some people that she can trust. And I'm curious to know how they're going to react to her being a starless. Because just like how the fortune teller didn't care, I wonder if they're not going to care either. Because of course, if she's going to have to trust them, they're going to have to know that she's a starless. So if and when they find out that she's being hunted because she's a starless, they won't be surprised, they won't be like, you lied to us, and they're going to turn on her. At the very least now, they're going to know she's a starless and they're going to be able to make the decision to stick around her or not. I'm also curious to know if the fact that her past life seemingly keeps talking to her, or some memories keep popping up or whatever, if that's ever gonna come up again. But having said all that, I can't wait to see what happens in the next episode.